For those of you who don't know me, which is everyone apart from Fran and Chris, my name is Mike Newman. I'm Managing Director of a specialist tourism marketing consultancy called B2Me. I've worked in the industry for about 25 years. I've worked with Chris back when he was alluding very gently to the magnificent work that I'm doing with Chris in about 2015, 2016. I've worked with Fran at Tourism Southeast, and I spend a lot of time supporting destinations and understand how to better engage with the travel and tourism industry. And about a year ago, I was asked to support a project in Birmingham, where the City Council were interested in understanding how they could build on their coach tourism, what they needed to do, and they had a game plan. They wanted to increase the number of coach-friendly visitor experiences, and this is how they were going about it. So I said, well, this is interesting. I'm going to ask a question. And the stakeholders in the council would go and then ask a question. I said, do coach drivers like you guys? And they went, what? And I said, does the coach industry like this destination? And I said, I have no idea, we've never asked. So I said, so it might be quite interesting to ask the question, what does the coach industry think of this destination? And the information that they came back with formed the entire strategy for the project, which I'm going to talk about a little bit in a minute. But then it got me thinking, was this a one-off, or is this actually how coach drivers think and feel? So I went back to these three organisations, some of which you may already know very well, some of which you may not know better. Confederation of Passenger Transport, the Guild of British Coach Operators, which is all the biggest coach operators in the country, and the Coach Tourism Association. And I polled through their boards, I polled all of their members. And I said, I want to have a rough guide to what you don't like, because it's clearly not just one destination. So they shared with me about 10 things they really hate. And they don't hate them from the perspective of they won't come, but they hate them from the perspective of it makes our life a lot more difficult. So these are some of the things. Overnight parking is a massive problem. If you're on a coach tour, if you're not a day trip vehicle, leaving your coach in an unsecured area with pretty much a written guarantee it will come back with either no tyres or someone liberally having tagged it, or they'll break a window. And that runs into tens of thousands of pounds pretty much immediately. And coach operators, particularly post-COVID, because you have to bear in mind that post-COVID, Chris pointed it out very viscerally, that big downward point. The coach industry was disproportionately hit because the number of coach operators who leased their vehicles is much higher than, say, hoteliers who lease their properties. So when the coach operators had to give up their vehicles, they then didn't have the money to get the vehicles back, which meant that their operations shrunk dramatically. Also, a lot of coach drivers went off and they became delivery drivers and they got paid more money and they did that. And a lot of the coach operators went, you know what, it's simply not worth it. What we'll do is we'll take council contracts, we'll do school runs. Because we get paid, we only need one or two vehicles. We don't need to keep updating our vehicles at £250,000, £300,000 a time. We can use any old vehicle to move a bunch of kids back. Another thing is, within destinations, is that when we are trying to attract international visitors, if you think about it, the coach door is on the other side of the vehicle. Now, it is actually illegal for a coach operator to drop anyone under the age of 18 roadside. They legally are obliged to drop from curbside, otherwise they're not allowed to drop. Which means destinations need to have off-side coach parks. They have to have a somewhere where kids and adults, because frankly, people taking bags off also don't particularly want to walk straight out into the middle of the road. So it's really, really important that when destinations are talking to councils and they're thinking, where are our vehicles dropping? They need to think about offsite. Otherwise, the operators themselves will say, we can't drop in this destination. We have to drop in a car park, for example. Otherwise, it's just not safe. And this photograph here, this is actually in Dublin. but it is absolutely typical where coach bays are not monitored. And so what happens is other people use them. They will use them in car parks, they will use them by the side of the road, taxis will use them. It's notorious outside hotels and city centres that everyone and their dog uses a coach bay because there's no coach there. But no one knows that there's no coach there because the coach can't stop there. So they get very upset. Rest services for drivers is a bigger thing than people take into account. Coach drivers are really proud of the vehicles that they use. And they will always carry buckets, brooms, sponges, and this kind of stuff on their vehicles because they like their vehicles to be clean. One of the reasons that coach drivers drive vehicles with private number plates is because it hides the age of the vehicle. And one of the reasons that they do that is because they know that their drivers are going to do absolutely everything they can to keep their vehicles looking lovely, which means they need access to water, which means they need the council to provide that service. They also need toilet drafts. These are not like aircraft. They're not just flying over an ocean and they can just let the toilet go. They actually need a pumping system. Now, these are often available in theory, but not in practice. And I don't need to spell out what happens if you're sat on a coach and the toilet doesn't smell so good. The coach driver doesn't like it, the passenger doesn't like it. We also need to remember that coach drivers are visitors. Now, lots of visitor experiences will, oh, yeah, we'll always welcome in the coach driver with a cup of tea in a mug. Thank you very much, it's coach driver. But actually, the last thing the coach driver wants to do is to hang out with their group. They literally would do almost anything else other than hang out with that group. So if you can say to your local business, your local cafes, your local whatevers, can we do a coach driver incentive for drivers? The vehicle will be dropped, the driver will gladly walk into town and they will sit down where they are guaranteed to not see anyone else from their group. And if they are, that person is lost. And they will be gone. But it is just worthwhile. And because these coach drivers will spend money, they're perfectly happy to spend money, which adds to local visitor comment. It may be adding in small incremental amounts, but again, just not picking on Chris, but only because what Chris says often makes sense. And I hate picking him up. Annoyingly, he does often make sense. It is when you are in a destination, you are trying to move that dial. How do I increase incremental revenue? One way of doing it is by getting people who don't spend money normally to start to spend money, because they'll gladly do it, but you need to give them the opportunity to do it. And that can be a small incentive, and it's just one more person sat in a cafe or one more person reading a newspaper that they bought from a newsagent that they weren't already carrying. So it's adding incremental. When it comes to communication and policy, this is where you have this massive disconnect between councils and destinations. Destinations are saying, we need coaches because coaches are a sustainable mode of transport. They're really good. People come in. We're all having a great time. Councils say, we're going to close the road in about an hour and we're going to reopen it as and when we feel like it. Coach drivers are many things, but what they are not is psychic. And when there is a diversion that's put into place and you have got a vehicle that is 20 meters long and weighs 11 tons, it can't just go, oh, it's fine, I'll just back up. Not a problem. And when we were listening earlier to SimpleView, SimpleView can very easily, as an example, other platforms aren't available, but as an example, SimpleView can connect to the traffic portal on the council side of the website, and then the destination can do a cascade mail to say, these are the road closures that are foreseeable over the next 6 months, or whatever it is. Because the other things that councils are very, very good at doing is suspending existing coach bays and then forgetting that they've done it. So they'll do building work, but they will suspend a coach bay. They will not provide an alternative coach bay. And they'll simply have forgotten that that's happened. And again, this is something that the destination needs to turn back to the council and say, are there any coach bay suspensions in place? What are the provisions as an alternative, and how do we get them? And because then the destination will share that. The council's not going to share it. But a destination will, because all the destination execs that you've got working within your organizations, they know these coach operators and they can share that information. And another thing that massively upsets coach drivers is being told to drop their customers at a park and ride in order for their customers to disembark and get onto an identical vehicle. When it comes to the sustainability model, it needs to be nuanced. A coach is still a coach. Coaches can be, should be exempted from ultra low emission zones, zero emission zones, or whatever, because the effort and the hassle of dropping and reloading, and then the coach not being able to stay at the park and ride spot anyway, so having to go now empty into the middle of that city or town or whatever it is. It simply makes no sense. This one-size-fits-all methodology is not only ironic, it's ridiculous, and it needs thinking through. And this is the one thing that I really discovered in Birmingham, is that the city council turned around and said, we've literally never thought of it like that. It's not that they couldn't do it, it's not that they wouldn't do it. They just never put two and two together. You have got eyes and ears on the ground all the time. You have got hoteliers. You have got visitor experiences. You have got local guides. You've got blue badge and green badge guides. You've got all of these assets available to you as a destination, able to share the coach operator, the coach driver experience with you. Because I can't second guess every destination, but what I will do is I will come into a destination and I'll speak to all of your assets and I will get that feedback, but you can have that in real time. Because another thing we've also learned is that a lot of coach operators, where they're really struggling to know how to navigate a city because of changes in directions and everything else, is they will literally pick up guides at the outskirts of the city and get the guide to act as their sat nav. Now, it's not a sustainable practice, but the guide, will do it. But it is all of this, and it's all of this feedback loop that you already have that can help you build your coach infrastructure in a different way, in a way that is much more engaging with and understanding of the people that you're actually trying to attract anyway. Now, I know that everyone loves a bit of data, but the thing is that you can get this data by basically following the steps I've got. It's predominantly going to be quantitative, not quantitative. But my argument is that qualitative data from a destination perspective is more usable than quantitative. It's all well and good to go how many coaches, but what you really want to know is what are the coaches doing? Where are the pinch points? Where are they not going? Where are they not dropping? It's much more useful data. And that is the data that can be used to influence that policy. Because the policy, from the council's perspective, is we want to ban all emission-based vehicles from our town centres, our city centres. From a destination perspective, that isn't practical or workable. So we need to use this qualitative approach. And most of this stuff doesn't really cost very much money, because most of this stuff is sharing pre-existing information. It is as simple as asking or seeing if the traffic management people can put up any form of a notice that you can then inform the coach operators. There is an arrow with a coach on it, and that is for you. It's a temporary sign. We're not asking for it to be painted on a road. We're not asking for it to be bolted to a wall. We're asking for a temporary sign to say go this way. And these are the sort of things that help policies adjust and help generate this revenue for you. So this is my practical giveaway. This is the 20-minute sphere of influence. People will literally shop where they are dropped. Because if you look at what people naturally do, they will stay fairly close to either their hotel, their visitor experience, or wherever it is they drop. This is one of the reasons why dropping in town is better than dropping at a park and ride or dropping at a coach park out of the city centre. And this feeds back into things like planning flexibly, letting coach operators use metro bus stops. Let them share space. It is everything that you can consider that is going to make life easy. Where do you, within your destination, want people to spend that cash? And again, if you're looking at how do we grow our revenues, how do we grow our visitor economies easily, put people in a place where they can spend money, because they will. Because whether they are UK residents traveling across the country, or whether they are international visitors visiting a place for a day or overnight, they will spend their money if they see a place to eat, if they see a place to shop, if they see a thing to do, and it's all within an easy walking distance, they will do it. The problem has been that historically, we view people on coaches as retirement groups. And they're not anymore. And there's a reason for this, one of which is that the demographic that sits behind the group travel organizer, they are aging literally. And they are also part of retirement clubs that don't have the money to privately charter vehicles anymore. But if you look at the work of companies based in London like Evan Evans or Golden Tours, who will do day trips all over the place, they are full of individuals who just happen to be booking for a one-time departure or a one-time arrival. They become a group by virtue of the fact that they turn up at the same time. But they are, in fact, all individuals. And what that means is that they all have their own spending power. They have no collective consciousness or unconsciousness around how much they have already spent. They don't think like that. They think as an individual, go, I want to eat here, I want to buy that, I'm going to go into Primark, or I'm going to go into Selfridges, or I'm going to go into H&M, or whatever it is, and I'm going to spend on my own for myself. And that is within this 20-minute sphere of influence. And that is why it's so important. And that is why it's something that you can share back to council to say, the better our parking spots or drop spots, the better we are placed to increase footfall and revenue. And that helps the high street. Now, I'm not a CPT kind of, I'm an advocate of, but I'm not there to pay you or anything like that. But it's really interesting that the coach-friendly scheme they organise has almost no non-heritage destinations in membership. Almost none. Blackpool is an example as one, but there were very, very few. Most of the accredited coach-friendly destinations are heritage towns and cities. Now, there's a reason for that, but the growth is in the metro centres. The growth is in the city centres, in the other places. And it's almost entirely based on small, doable things that just make it easier for the coach business. It isn't about vast expenditure. It is about thinking, how would a coach driver benefit from us? And it has a huge impact. Every time you do this, you have a big impact, because all coach operators will be aware that you are CPT accredited, and it's all very, very helpful. So here is a couple of other things just for you to think about. We are not yet ready for long distance electric coach vehicles. There are several reasons. One, the vehicles simply don't exist. The reason that the vehicles don't exist is because they need lots of batteries to do long distances. They have lots of batteries, something has to give. And the thing that gives is luggage space. So you can't have vehicles as yet that can travel long distances and have luggage space for multi-day tours. But what we do have are vehicles that will do day trips. And what city centres have is an electric bus fleet, often. Now, the cunning thing about an electric bus fleet is that they're out and about all day, which means that all the commercial charging points in the bus depots are simply not being used. Now, if you imagine, for every electric vehicle that comes to your destination, that has got a range of about 250 miles, so that's 125 miles round trip from point of start, okay? If you imagine, you say to them, you don't need to stop in a coach park. You can stop in the bus depot, you can charge every 4 hours, and suddenly their distance doubles, And you can start to create the longer itinerary that we all want with increased dwell times. Because if the vehicle is charging over 4 hours, that means that the visitor is staying in town for 5 hours minimum, rather than 2. Ka-ching. And it all starts to add up. Now, it is seemingly the case that for the majority of councils, they would have no issue in letting coach vehicles for a charge use commercial charging points. And when you think that a commercial charger costs upwards of £30,000 to install, no council is going to be keen to do that unless they've got an incredibly good business model and a huge capital infrastructure project plans. But they've already got them. And the coach operators will pay, just as they will pay 30 or 40 or 50 pounds to stay in a secure car park, they will pay the same 30, 40 or 50 pounds to charge their vehicle. Just another thought for you people. So I've mentioned this already, but these are all the kind of things. Coaches generate revenue, lots and lots of it. They are very, very sustainable as a method of transport. And if you can work as a destination lead with your council lead, particularly in planning and traffic, and say we need to integrate these policies so that we can encourage more coach travel, then things very rapidly start to scale up in a very positive way. And these are just sort of some of the thoughts. And a final thing that I just wanted to talk about, it's called the Inverness coaching model. And the reason it's called the Inverness coaching model is because Cunningworth is what Inverness did. And it's very, very clever. They have recognized that they can act as a hub for a much wider area. And what they do is they have worked in collaboration with other destinations around them. And they have said, we will provide the core infrastructure. So whether that's the secure parking or the charging or the whatever, or the accommodation, whatever it is, we'll provide that. But we will then share all of the opportunities to explore the wider area. And that is increasingly going to be the case. If you look across Great Britain as a whole, the opportunity to hub and spoke is getting better and better and better, because different destinations have got different abilities. And so what we try and do, what I would try and do, is to focus on enhancing the visitor experience by saying, you know, distill or to partially distill, again from Chris, the see more, stay longer, leave happier methodology, because people are going to get more bang for their buck. And it all worked on a very sustainable basis. And that was what I really wanted to share with you. So thank you ever so much for however many minutes that's been. I hope it has been vastly enlightening. And I will be here signing autographs. Singing. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to say, Mike, I know there wasn't Q&A on that.
No, Q&A away.
It's just on that basis that who, out of all destination managers, who wouldn't want coaches arrive? You know, we thought the day had passed when loads and hundreds of coaches were rocking up into our destinations, and actually your point about FITs on coaches is really, really relevant. And that's the way we do have these coaches continuing rocking up into our destinations and spending. And you politely said at the start of that, you know, it wouldn't, these are barriers and it wouldn't stop spend, but I would actually argue with that and say, actually, coach drivers, tour operators, whoever's putting that on, would absolutely choose somewhere else to avoid a headache. They'll choose a similar destination, a similar product, rather than come to your destination if everything is
100%. 100%.
We'll lose that money if it doesn't.
Because I think historically there's always been the fear with the coach industry. It's always they can't sell 40 seats on a 53-seat bus, they'll cancel the tour. But we've got very much stuck in that rut that it's all been commercially driven and it's all been based on a very kind of like simplistic perspective. It's not. If the coach driver doesn't like your destination, they will just go, oh, do you know what, I'd rather not.
We'll go to this one.
Yeah.
We'll go to my place.
If any of you have got any thoughts or experiences on the ground that you want to share, feel free.
I think the point about communication is key in challenging the status quo. So we had a situation, this is not entirely chartered, it's partly to do with it, it's partly service operator. So we have, as you know, a brand new harbour, big ships coming in, cruise ships. One of the keys is a good control away from harbour exit. So if the vessel goes there, there needs to be a system to get people off site because they can't walk off site. Year one, the operator that had the license from the council to run a shuttle bus into the city centre basically said, well, we'll run it from the bus stop just outside the harbour. Various reasons, they decided not to pitch for the contract the following year. So another operator came in and actually said to the harbour authority, can we bring the bus into your private land? And lo and behold, they said yes, because that whole point about getting two buses was pissing people off majorly. By having to get a bus for a kilometre to get off and queue up to get another bus into town.
So
it comes as, you know, actually having a joined up conversation with a local authority, a landowner, and asking the questions, not just simply accepting the status quo.
100%. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Moving everybody on.
Yeah.
We've got 5 minutes.
So I'm Nick Robinson. I do a number of things, and I now put them on a slide after this just for simplicity. I am going to take the opportunity to plug a couple of things on here which are nothing to do with my presentation stroke interactive session where I need your feedback. What would be useful though, just for me, as it's a smallish group, is to just, we're not doing introductions, but to really quickly go around the room and just indicate what sector you work in, so destination management, university, etc. That would help me to know which bits of this are most important, and it would also help me to think about how you then answer the questions that I've got for you. So we just start at the front.
Probably a bit of everything.
Cool.
Place brand and marketing.
Travel trade engagement and strategy.
DMO.
University.
DMI. Universities. DMO. DMI. Yeah.
Destination marketing. Events, professional body. Government.
Usual destination.
University. Oh, I'm a student, but I work at a national landscape, so that's a national pizza.
Yeah, I'm a student too.
So the bit of this I didn't want to miss for those of you who work in destination management. In there, so the ones in red are sort of the ones that are linked to the work I'm doing around policy and the content of this presentation. I didn't want to miss one at the end where it says the Cold War Network. So in my 1 minute pitch, the Cold War Network came about as a result of a British Academy grant I secured with a colleague at Beckett. As a result of that project, we have set up an organisation that effectively represents owners, curators, researchers and others with stakeholdership in Cold War sites and Cold War heritage that is publicly accessible. We've got about 605 members, and each year we organise now a National Cold War Heritage Week, and we are currently having conversations with, you are in the right room, this might not sound like it, we're currently having conversations with LVEPs around how we create tourism product that sits around Britain's Cold War heritage. I'd welcome a conversation with anybody who thinks that sounds interesting over lunch. So I am involved in a number of organisations where I have an interest in tourism policy. And I have a selfish interest in this because I work in university and I recognise some of the content that I'm going to share initially will be familiar to some of you. I picked this figure. There's lots of different versions of what is the value of tourism to the economy. So this is a figure that government uses for purely tourism. There's a very similar figure for hospitality. There's a bigger figure for events. But there isn't a single figure combined that gives you an accurate impression of how big the sector is because there's duplication where those figures are used. So I've used this one simply to make the point. But this is a sector which supports a huge number of jobs and brings in a huge amount of money to the economy, and yet is not really recognised by, I'm going to say government in the broader sense, but I'll soften that slightly in a second, not really recognised by governments as valuable in the same way that other sectors are seen as valuable to the UK's growth strategy. That doesn't mean that we're not having good conversations with governments. So in 2021, there was a white paper produced which essentially looked at, although it looked at post-16, it essentially looked at university education and said, well, actually, there's a number of issues with the way that students across all subjects are measured, assessed, and where they go when they complete their degrees. So in university speak, we're talking about continuation, so how many of those students join a course and stay for the full 3 years, how many of them complete the course with good honours and with a clean record, so without having lots of resits and failures and retakes, and where do they then go in terms of graduate outcomes. And the suggestion in that paper was that you would measure those on the basis of sort of 90-ish, 92% for each of those metrics. So if you imagine a pharmacy student, just because it's an easy example, if you want to be a pharmacist, you need a degree. So you go to university, you're likely to stay on that course at that institution because you can't be a pharmacist without the degree. Because you will have gone into university with high levels of qualifications to get onto a pharmacy degree in the first place, you'll graduate with good honours, and you will go into an assistant pharmacist role, which is considered to be a graduate level job. So it's fairly easy with pharmacy degrees to be getting between 95 and 100% for each of those metrics. Much harder for tourism. And for hospitality and events. So I'll talk about tourism because this is the TNI, but read tourism, hospitality and events. Because that is not the case for our sector. We fall into, or could fall into, what the government say in that white paper is a low quality course, where students don't all continue the degree, students don't all graduate with good honours, and they don't go into graduate level jobs. So we did a number of things. In my role as chair of the Association for Tourism and Higher Education, in 2023, we hosted a conference at the University of West London. We wrote a white paper, an open letter, which is still available on change.org, and we funded with the other two subject associations for hospitality and events, a white paper which looked at future growth in courses. Not a particularly optimistic picture, but I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. And also sought to identify how important our subjects are in terms of economic and social impact. At the same time that we were looking at this, government were talking about defunding BTECs. So if you've got no qualifications for people to study at 16 for tourism, you're not talking to young people when they're 14, 15 about tourism as a career choice. Over the last couple of years, I was involved with a tourism skills working group led by APTA, which did a lot of work around particularly the 16 to 18 piece. And our understanding until 2 weeks ago was that the decision to defund those BTECs had been paused until 2027, which was great, but with that question mark about what happens next. I put a small plug in there for ADHD, which you can read while I talk about what happens next. So when I said I'd come and talk about education, skills, qualifications here, I did it not knowing that the new post-16 white paper would be coming out at the start of last week. So what follows is an analysis of what that white paper probably means for the sector, and then some questions which I think hopefully help to start a conversation about, well, actually, how do we then make sure we get the most opportunity out of that change in qualifications and policy. Not all of it is in any way negative. However, one of the important bullet points on here are the ones at the bottom. Having written that open letter, having funded that research, and having hosted the conference at UWL, we have a really good opportunity and have enjoyed an opportunity over the last couple of years to start to inform and influence policy. So I have met with DCMS a number of times. I've taken part on behalf of the subject associations in the working groups of the Vista Economy Advisory Group, which is developing the new tourism strategy for the UK. The Outer Tourism Skills Working Group was formed and has done work around post-16 education more broadly. And we're currently now looking at what the new white paper means. We've taken part in a number of consultations, and in every one of those consultations, the feedback has been from almost everybody involved in the consultation elements of it, that skills and qualifications are really important, and that our sector still suffers from a poor perception amongst decision makers who might be thinking about going to university, or who might be parents of people thinking about going to university. A piece of research done recently suggested that 17% of parents are likely to think that their child studying tourism, hospitality, or events is a good idea. So that means that for those of you who work in higher education, 83% of the parents who are coming with their prospective student to open days are not yet convinced that our sector is a good sector to work in. I said I'd soften that broad the government. We know that some of the work we did in the white paper was picked up and used by Chris Bryant when he was Secretary of State for Tourism. We have had really good conversations with DCMS. A number of things appear in the papers for the tourism strategy, in particular work around the perception of the sector as an employer, and work around graduate outcomes and how they are measured, so that there's a recognition that actually students who graduate from a tourism, hospitality, or events degree maybe shouldn't be measured after 15 months of graduation in terms of what job they are in, but maybe that should be extended to better reflect the nature and structure of the tourism sector. So talked about that slide, and that's partly why we've got a set of questions which I'm hoping you will answer, especially if technology works. Otherwise, there's a whiteboard and a pen you'll have to share. I've got a set of questions after this that I want to use to then inform both next steps for those conversations that I have with other organisations, and to help us build a case in particular for T-levels and post-16 qualifications which meet the needs of our sector. So the new paper, the Post-16 Education and Skills White Paper, came out the Monday before last. I have picked out the University UK's highlights and written in blue underneath the key points that we think are relevant in analysing that policy. So there's 3 or 4 of these. So the first one was an increase in domestic undergraduate tuition fee cap, which is great for universities because we haven't had any inflation-linked rises until this year, which has led to what many of you have seen in the news around sort of education funding crisis for universities. However, it also in there refers to education providers meet quality thresholds. So that issue of completion, continuation, and progression that I hinted at the start, how many students join the course, stay on the course, complete it with good honours, and get a graduate level job, is linked to tuition fee increases. And there have been suggestions in previous white papers that if you have low quality courses, your fees for those low quality courses may be capped, which would be less financially attractive for an institution and is more likely to lead to a university saying we're not going to deliver this, than we'll live with the lower fee level. So there's a risk that this leads to a significant decrease in the number of courses for our subject areas, which obviously then impacts on the talent pipeline. The first 2 of those, continuation and completion, you slightly different terminology in there. The completion and that's the students who join us and where they get to is absolutely the responsibility of the university, having recruited those students. Now, there's some things we can do with industry that would help to keep those students. So my own institution, we have a partnership with Jet2. Jet2 employ our students during their second year in hybrid working jobs. They offer them bespoke placement opportunities for a sandwich year, and they then coach and mentor them into management level jobs when they graduate. So actually those students who impress Jet2 have a clear trajectory that takes them straight into a graduate level job and an incentive to stay with the university while they're studying. But there aren't that many examples of those sorts of partnerships in universities generally. And we are lucky because Jet2's head office is in Leeds and they're a large employer. And we know from talking to people in destination management and from working in destination management, you are neither large employers nor do you have large budgets available to do this sort of thing. But those graduate outcomes are probably a shared challenge where actually there's a convergence between what you need as employees and what we need as good graduates, where we could come together with slightly more strategically well thought out ideas. This is just for interest. This was shared by a colleague at GISC who presented at the policy conference I hosted last week. It shows where all first degree graduates go in blue, and in purple it shows where tourism, hospitality and events graduates go. I like this because I think it highlights that, and it's a huge misunderstanding, but we have to deal with those 83% of parents who aren't yet convinced. But doing a degree in tourism isn't going to limit where you go in terms of your career, because a significant number of people who do a tourism, hospitality, events degree go into management, education, business, HR and finance, marketing, sales, administrative role, skilled trade and craft, as well as the ones you'd expect around retail, waiting, clerical, secretarial, administrative. Those are the non-graduate level jobs. If you looked at the majority of institutions results for tourism, hospitality and events graduates, they will all have around 95 to 100% of students going into jobs post-graduation, but they may only have 50 to 70% who are in graduate level jobs. And it's the graduate level job bit of that which is the challenge. Similarly, this slide gives again a bit of a feel for where tourism, hospitality, events graduates go and the amount of time they're employed for. Interestingly, they are more likely to be working full-time than graduates from other degree courses, only just, but they are more likely to be. And this was the summary from, so this was taken from HESA data, and HESA provided these bits of information for us. Main role is as events managers within events businesses, working in tourism and hotels, and working in higher education. Quite a large group go into specialist roles such as air travel and are working in a sector that is clearly related to the subject they studied, but not considered professional level in the occupational classifications. So when you're recruiting graduates, you're almost certainly recruiting them into jobs that will feel like a graduate level job because you need them to have a degree. Government doesn't see those necessarily as graduate level jobs. A majority, I think it was about 52%, said a degree was a requirement for the roles that they do. A large majority say these jobs use their skills, are meaningful and play an important role in their career plans. So our qualifications and those entry level jobs are absolutely where those graduates want to be and what they want to be doing, but they aren't seen as graduate level jobs. And that means that the courses they come from are seen to be delivering low quality courses. The second of these was around reforms of the Strategic Priorities Grant to ask universities to emphasise work that sit alongside the 8 industrial growth sectors. So advanced manufacturing, clean energy industries, creative industries, defence, digital and technologies, financial services, life sciences and professional and business services. So you have 3 sectors in tourism, hospitality and events that make a significant contribution to the economy, but aren't in the 8 industrial sectors. Now, in slight defence of the industrial strategy, travel, tourism, hospitality are included in a strand that sits underneath those, refers to critical national infrastructure. But if you are an education provider wanting to align yourself with the government's expectations, you focus on the 8 industrial growth sectors, tourism, hospitality and events. Possibly you could argue fall in part into creative industry, but we are largely ignored despite being the 3rd biggest contributor to economic growth. There's then these points which will be differently relevant to different people in the room. So there is an emphasis on more people doing higher education in their local college. If you are a university teaching tourism, you are almost certainly going to face more competition from your local FE sector, because this opens up the opportunity for the local FE sector to potentially be able to award their own degrees. Reconfirms the changes set out in the immigration white paper. So it is unlikely that most of the jobs in our sector would qualify for skilled worker visas. And we know from international student recruitment has been hit by a number of government policies, despite the economic benefits of international students studying in the UK. But they also, from 2027, will only have an 18-month graduate work visa on completion of the degree to get into a skilled level job. So it becomes harder for an international student to have a long-term job in the UK. And we know, just to give you a sort of an HE view, I work at a university that has good, healthy numbers of students, and we've seen an increase in the number of tourism students this year. Our local FE colleges and those who I talk to elsewhere in the country have seen an increase in the number of students studying at FE over the last 2 years. So there's absolutely growth in interest and demand from young people who want to work in the sector. But there are also universities out there that have tiny numbers of students. There is at least one in our review of the 2 years ago white paper that has just 5 students on a tourism degree and appear to have a vice chancellor who is happy that that's a viable course. But we would generally, you'd want 15 to 20 students on every module on a course for that course to really be financially viable. And that just points to a bit more competition in the market, which might in fact result in both FE and HE institutions failing to recruit enough students. And then there's this, which is perhaps the most interesting change. In that post-16 white paper, there's a big emphasis on the introduction of V levels. So V levels are effectively like an A level. You can choose up to 3 A or V levels, and there will be a V level for tourism. So this is probably a good thing. If you are 14 or 15 and thinking about what do I do when I finish my GCSEs, you would currently be choosing between a vocational qualification, BTEC, for example, in travel and tourism, or A levels, and that BTEC route is really important. What there isn't or has never been is a particularly good A level travel and tourism route, and a V level offered by a large number of schools and colleges would mean that actually, if you're thinking at 16, I quite like the idea of working in tourism, but I'm not entirely sure. I could do a V level in tourism, I could do a V level in geography, and I could, sorry, an A level in geography, a V level in tourism, and an A level in history. So that might be good, and it might attract more people into the sector. But if you talk to the HE people who are here today, they will tell you that 50 to 70% of their students come from a BTEC route, the extended BTEC, which is equivalent to 3 A levels. And there is no equivalent to that currently in the white paper. The equivalent would be a T level. And just for, there's a few benefits in here. So, there's other things around B levels. There's never been an event management qualification at all at 16 to 18. That could be an opportunity. But because the phasing of this, and we understand, will mean that in 2031 there will no longer be a BTEC in travel and tourism. There is an opportunity, however, to argue to have a T level in travel and tourism. Still, and it's worth noting that BTECs and T levels are essentially based on national occupational standards, which only cover a tiny part of the industry that we all work in. So the national occupational standards for BTECs are tour operator, travel agent, and I think it's one around cabin crew. So all the stuff that you do on destination management marketing, that's not a national occupational standard for the sector. BTECs have been able to be delivered in a broad enough way that almost hasn't mattered because you can add extra content in. T levels, if there's evidence that there's a market for them, we can collectively say we need a T level in travel and tourism. Which brings me on to these 3 things, which are the questions that I'd like you to help me answer. So one is how we bridge that gap between completion, should say good honours, and progression to graduate level. It's been a busy 2 weeks. How we bridge that gap between completion and progression. There are, for example, no graduate schemes in destination management, that students going into graduate schemes are in graduate level jobs. How do we recognise and value graduates with our qualifications in the graduate labour market? We're talking, and I've got a course director who says this lots when she's talking to stakeholders. These are young people who are, if they live at home, investing the best part of £40,000 in a degree because they want to work in our sector. That alone, if they're a good student, should set them apart from all the other graduates who think, this might be an interesting job to do. But how often do we recognise in adverts that actually we specifically want people who come from a degree in a related subject area? If they are students who are living away from home, they're likely to be investing £60,000 to work in our sector. And we all know that it's not the best paid sector, so you have to work quite a long time if you're going to be in a position to repay that level of debt. And then the final question is that what does 16 to 18 qualifications need to look like? So universities, if we recruit students from any number of qualifications, have degree awarding powers, have industry panels, we would like to think that our courses are good, well designed, fit for purpose. The gap is between 16 and 18. If we say there needs to be a T-level, what does that T-level look like? What are the sorts of things that a student needs to study? A T-level has to include 45 hours as a minimum of work each year for the student. Where do those 45 hours come from? So if this works, you should be able to scan that QR code and then enter your answers to that question. Is that working? Excellent. I'm going to move between the three questions, but so that there isn't an awkward silence while everybody's typing. I thought I'd combine that with the opportunity for anyone in the room to ask questions and to have a discussion in the last sort of last 5 minutes of this session.
So what we're hearing from the new devolution in the established now is that under the right to a 16 to 18 on education is one of the areas that we want to develop. So what do you think is the implications of this on strategy?
So it's hard to say because
What do you know about it?
I know a bit. I think the issue, I think the fundamental issue comes down to demand for courses. Now, my understanding is that actually, and this is the same with the T-level argument, if there's demand for a course, commercially, funding-wise, it's attractive to deliver it. And therefore, there's almost, there's a process for T-levels to follow to have them approved. Where that decision making is devolved, it's influencing decision makers in the same way that we're trying to influence DCMS and the Department of Education to recognise how important these qualifications are. We've done a lot of work with a wide range of stakeholders around sort of lobbying for a recognition of the importance of 16 to 18 qualifications because they're such an important route into university and into industry and entry-level jobs.
It's more of an observation than anything else. I've done a fair amount of work with kind of 16 to 18 year olds. And there is a perception issue because one of the core questions I tend to be asked is how much do I earn and what car do I drive? Both of which, the answer to the first one is lots and the second one is which car or bus. And I think one of the things is also, and I think government has got a lot to answer for, they talk about hospitality as an industry, and what they're actually saying is pub bars and restaurants. And that is just not sexy. And it's also not true when it comes to what our industry offers. But the perception is that hospitality as an industry, and therefore tourism and leisure is basically working in a swimming pool, and everything else is working in a pub.
So interesting, I went to a presentation in Leeds where the chief executive of the city council said how great the hospitality industry was giving all our students in the city part-time work. And you think, it's just such a missed opportunity. Then we have tens of really good hotels with graduates who are working in those hotels as GMs and in other serious roles. So the hospitality question is interesting because one of the outcomes of the work around tourism strategy, that's the third question. One of the outcomes of that work has been around, or is starting a discussion around, is there a need for an organisation to effectively represent the sector? So think UK hospitality, but for tourism, or should UK hospitality be that organisation that embraces tourism? And at the conference we hosted last week, there was a conversation about actually what we just need is a name, something simple that says actually our sector is all of these things, which is why deliberately titled this visitor economy, because we can't differentiate between hospitality, events and tourism, really. And yet hospitality sits in a different part of government to tourism, and or partly sits in another part of government. So hospitality is part of industry and trade. Tourism and events are in part of culture, media and sport, yet they are all contributing to the same visitor economy. So the it's another building. So the things that you've shared on here, and I'm happy to have conversations over lunch, will feed directly into the work that we do with DCMS and UK hospitality. We'll also use in the Alpha Tourism Skills Working Group. That working group is set up specifically to look at what qualifications do we need between 16 and 18, and how do we lobby to make sure there are vocational and academic routes into industry. We had worked in that group on the development of a new qualification when we understood BTECs were going to be defunded, which would sit alongside A-levels. Some of that work will now go into that tourism V level. Some of it will go into actually what does a T level look like, and how do we make sure that by 2031, when the travel and tourism BTEC comes to an end, that we have a suitable qualification. Having said that, of course, it's in the government white paper, and 2031 is at least one election away. So this is a shifting landscape, and we've seen that shifting landscape over the last 3 years of doing this work. What it will also do, though, is inform the Association for Tourism and Higher Education's lobbying work around skills and qualifications as well. Thank you all very much.
Peter, just in any of this, is there any acknowledgement of private universities?
Yeah, so the work that ATHE have done, we are looking at how we were set up as a subject association for tourism. So effectively, if government are looking at things like subject benchmark, we would be a stakeholder in that process. We now have a further education membership and further education representation, and we invite all HE institutions, public and private, to things like the Northern Tourism Academic Network events we organise.
As the BA table.
Some. Thank you all very much. I don't want to stand in the way of anybody for lunch.